Hi, my name's Ira. Last week at dinner, I asked for another bowl of soup. My wife called me a useless husband living off her, right there at the table. Her parents laughed, loud. I didn't yell, I didn't fight, I just sat there. Then she dumped leftover soup in my bowl, like I was a stray dog. And when the plate hit my face, something in me cracked. I'd just signed the house over to her. Because after the accident, I thought love meant sacrifice. But turns out, love had a price tag. 7 minutes later, the doorbell rang. And that's when the truth showed up, wearing a suit, holding the one envelope that would change everything. Want to know what $990,000 can't buy? Dignity. I didn't say a word that night, but from that silence, everything unraveled. I've always believed that peace inside a home doesn't come from winning arguments. It comes from knowing when to step back, when to let small things pass, and when to trust that the people you love won't misuse your goodwill. That belief has guided most of my life. I'm past 60 now, raised in a quiet Midwestern town where neighbors wave even if they don't know your name, and marriages are meant to be steady, not loud. Our street in Omaha has always been like that. Lawns trimmed on Saturdays, porch lights on before dark. The kind of place where nothing dramatic ever seems to happen. Our house sat halfway down the block, a modest 2-story with siding that needed repainting, and a maple tree out front that dropped leaves every fall like clockwork. I'd lived there long enough to know the sounds of it, the way the steps creaked near the landing, the hum the refrigerator made late at night, the soft clink of a spoon touching a bowl when I set it down just right, aligned with the edge so it wouldn't scrape. I didn't think much about that habit. It was just something my hands did when everything felt in order. I've never been a man who raised his voice. I worked with my hands most of my life, fixed what broke, paid the bills on time, and stayed out of trouble. When something needed doing, I did it. When something needed calming down, I was usually the one who sat quietly until the storm passed. That role suited me. It still does in some ways. The decision to sign the house over didn't feel like a decision at all. It felt like paperwork. The kind of thing couples handle together after dinner, sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of envelopes and a pen that keeps skipping. My wife was always better with documents than I was. She liked things organized, color-coded, filed away neatly. I trusted that about her. I trusted her. We talked about it in plain terms: convenience, simplicity, making things easier if anything ever came up. No one raised their voice. No one pressured me. There was no sense of urgency hanging in the air. It was framed as a practical move, something responsible people did when they'd been together a long time and knew what tomorrow was supposed to look like. I remember thinking that I'd spent decades fixing leaks and patching roofs. Signing a few pages didn't seem like much compared to that. I didn't consult a lawyer. I didn't ask many questions. At my age, you start believing that not every decision needs to be treated like a battle. Sometimes you do what husbands have done for generations. You lean into trust. You assume the ground under your feet will stay where it is. My wife thanked me afterward. She smiled the way she always did when a task was finished and crossed off a list. We folded the papers and slid them into a folder. The pen went back into the drawer. Life went on. From the outside, our marriage probably looked solid. She handled schedules, kept track of appointments, remembered birthdays. I handled repairs, phone calls, the unglamorous stuff that keeps a household running. Her parents came by often enough to feel like part of the rhythm, but not so often that it felt intrusive. They had opinions, sure, but nothing that struck me as threatening. Families talk. That's what families do. I've always been the youngest son. That shapes you in ways people don't always notice. You learn early how to wait your turn, how to listen more than you speak, how to let older voices fill the room first. It never felt like a burden to me. It felt like training. I took that same instinct into my marriage. If something needed deciding, I trusted the process would include me, even if I didn't lead it. Looking back, there were moments I brushed aside without thinking. Small things. Decisions that were answered before I finished my sentence. My opinion acknowledged with a nod, then quietly set aside. It wasn't done sharply. There was always a polite tone, "We'll handle it," or "Don't worry about that." I told myself it was efficiency, not dismissal. I told myself that after years together, we'd earned the right to streamline things. The house came up again in passing once or twice. Casual references, nothing alarming. Just reminders that everything was settled, taken care of. I accepted that at face value. Why wouldn't I? Trust, once established, has a way of filling in gaps you don't realize are there. There were evenings when we sat at the table in comfortable silence. I'd eat slowly, set my spoon down carefully, straightening it without looking. She'd flip through mail or tap something into her phone. The quiet felt earned, like a shared understanding rather than distance. I told myself that was what long marriages settled into. Not fireworks, something steadier. In my own mind, I made small promises. This is temporary. Family adjusts. Everyone has phases. Silence, when chosen, can be a form of protection. I believed that deeply. I still do, in the right moments. I thought that by staying calm, by not making an issue out of every slight, I was keeping the balance intact. That night, nothing felt wrong. The house was quiet. The streetlights clicked on outside. I rinsed my bowl and set it in the rack, lining it up just so. Everything looked the way it always had. I didn't know then that one signature, written without fear or doubt, had quietly decided who I would be allowed to become. But the shift wasn't sudden. It was soft, like a sweater shrinking in the wash, so slowly that you don't notice it doesn't fit until you try it on again. A few weeks after the papers were filed away, the days went on like they always had. I kept to my usual rhythm, watering the small patch of tomatoes out back, patching the screen door that caught each time it closed. Mornings started with coffee and silence, the kind we'd shared for decades. But then, words around me began to change. Not loudly, not cruelly, just differently. At dinner one evening, my wife mentioned the bank. She said, "We'll move the joint account to something simpler. Just my name for now. Make things easier." Her tone was brisk, decisive, the way she used to talk about cleaning out the garage or replacing the tires. I looked up from my plate, fork paused, but before I could answer, she added, "It's just temporary, obviously. You don't need the extra stress." Her parents nodded along from across the table. "It's smart," her mother said. "With your condition, no sense in overcomplicating things." My condition. I hadn't heard it called that before. I wasn't sick. I wasn't dying. I'd slowed down, sure. But I still woke early, still handled the mail, still knew where the fuse box was when the lights flickered, still knew how to fix a door when it slammed wrong. "I'll still keep you in the loop," my wife added, then turned to her father and asked about his blood pressure meds like the matter was closed. Lately, she'd been finishing my sentences, not as a kindness, but like a habit. When I'd begin to offer a thought about when to mow the lawn or how to reschedule a delivery, she'd gently cut in with her version, polished, and everyone would just nod as if I hadn't spoken. Her parents began making little suggestions, which somehow became decisions. "Maybe you should consider having a cleaner come in," her mom said once, glancing at the dust on the baseboards. "Someone who can keep up." My hands were folded in my lap. "I'm still managing." Her dad chuckled. "It's not about managing. It's about ease, for both of you." I nodded, but it didn't feel like agreement. It felt like being erased, one pencil stroke at a time. I didn't argue. I didn't want conflict in my own home. But for the first time, I felt the floor shift under me. Not a collapse, just a tilt. Just enough to notice you've started sliding. One Saturday afternoon, I overheard a conversation from the kitchen. My wife was on the phone with her sister. "Well, yes," she was saying. "We've moved everything over. It's just simpler this way." She paused, then added with a laugh, "He's not really involved in those things anymore." I stood in the hallway, just out of sight, holding a screwdriver I'd gone to fetch. Not involved. I didn't drop the tool. I didn't step in. I just stood there, still. My face didn't move, but something in me went quiet. That same evening, they planned a weekend out, just her and her parents. I heard it unfold from the living room. "It'll give you some rest," her mother said, "and us some fun." They all laughed. No one asked if I wanted to come. No one even looked over. I didn't say anything that night. I told myself it wasn't personal. People adjust. Things get overlooked. I'm slower now, I reasoned. Maybe it was kindness, letting me rest. Maybe they thought I needed it. Maybe I did need it. I kept telling myself that. It became a quiet loop in my head, a story I edited so it wouldn't hurt. They were trying. They cared. They just didn't know how to show it right now. The next morning, I fixed the loose knob on the hallway closet, took my time, sat on the small bench beside the door and tested the latch twice. Then I rolled over to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and set it down on the counter with deliberate care. I didn't fumble. My hands were steady. The glass didn't wobble. It made a soft sound against the granite. The kind of sound you don't notice unless you're listening for it. I didn't say anything. I just sat there, letting the quiet fill the room again. Something was different. Not broken, not yet, but different. And I felt it, just under the skin, like a current too faint to jolt, but strong enough to make you wary. I still believed I could adjust, that if I stayed steady, everyone else would catch up, that love and routine would realign, the way chairs drift back to their place after being bumped. But as I watched the three of them pack for their weekend, laughing, trading stories I wasn't part of, I started to feel the space I left behind wasn't being saved. I didn't feel invisible yet, but I could tell the room was starting to forget where to look. I stayed where I was as the front door closed behind them, the three of them heading off for their weekend trip. The sound of their voices faded down the driveway, my wife's quick laugh, her mother's flatter one, her father humming along to whatever was playing in the car. I didn't move for a while, just sat there at the kitchen table, fingers brushing the rim of my glass. It was still early, maybe just past 6. The evening stretched out ahead like it always did, ordinary and quiet. Later, I rolled myself into the dining room for supper. It was just the 4 of us that night, my wife, her parents, and me. Nothing out of place. The table was already set, placemats ironed, bowls filled with her mother's beef and barley soup, salt shaker in its usual spot by my elbow. No candles, no music. Just the low hum of the fridge and the scrape of cutlery. I always sat at the far end of the table, closest to the window. It used to be my preferred seat. These days, it was also the only one easy to get to with the chair. My wife said it gave me more space, which it did. But sometimes, it felt like being at the kids' table, close enough to hear everything, too far to matter much. Her father started talking about the weather, some cold front moving in from the west. Her mother mentioned a neighbor's new landscaping. My wife nodded along, offering smiles, steering the conversation neatly around me like traffic cones in the road. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. I'd gotten used to just listening, watching the little ways things shifted. Like how her mother served everyone from the pot, but paused before reaching me, waiting for my wife to give a nod. Like how no one asked what I thought of the soup, only whether it was warm enough. I was halfway through my bowl when I looked down and realized I was still hungry. Not ravenous, just not quite done. The broth was good, comforting. I glanced up and waited until the moment felt right, then spoke as gently as I could. Could I get another bowl? That was it. No tone, no rush, just a question at the dinner table between family. Everything paused. Not the world, just the room. Just a fraction of a second, but enough to notice. My wife set her spoon down slowly. Her father looked away. Her mother pursed her lips like she was holding in a thought. I kept my eyes on the soup pot. I hadn't expected applause. I'd expected soup. Then she spoke. "Really?" my wife said. "Another bowl?" I blinked, unsure how to answer. She didn't wait for one. "You already had a full serving. Maybe slow down a little. You're not exactly burning calories these days, are you?" She didn't laugh. That would have been easier. It was the calm in her voice that landed hardest, like she was reading out loud from a list of facts. The tone you use when reminding someone the milk is expired. Across the table, her father let out a quiet chuckle. Her mother smirked into her napkin. No one looked at me. They weren't trying to hurt me. That's what made it worse. They were just comfortable. Comfortable saying things like that in front of me. comfortable letting the silence that followed mean whatever it meant. I sat still. The spoon in my hand felt heavier than it had 5 minutes ago. They kept eating. The conversation picked up again, as if nothing had happened. My wife asked her dad about his car battery. Her mom brought up a church fundraiser. They all chuckled at something about raffle tickets. I wasn't part of the conversation. I wasn't even adjacent to it. I was nearby. I thought about speaking up. Just a few words. That wasn't necessary. Or, I'm still sitting here. But nothing came out. My mouth stayed closed. Not out of fear, not really. Just habit. Peacekeeping has a way of turning into silence you forget how to break. My eyes drifted to the middle of the table, to the pot of soup still sitting on the trivet. Steam no longer rose from it. No one touched it. No one moved it. It just sat there, half full, completely ignored. I felt the edge of something then. Not anger, but something quieter, like shame's cousin. I wasn't being scolded. I was being handled, tucked into the corner of the night like an afterthought. I lowered my gaze to the table, to a small glass salt shaker near my hand. It was already in line with the edge of the placemat, but I adjusted it anyway. Just a 1/4 inch to the left, straightening it until the angle felt right. My hand was steady. I didn't look up. The laughter had stopped, but its echo sat in the space where I used to belong. I could still feel it. Not the sound, just the warmth of it, the kind that used to include me. Now it passed through me like I wasn't there. That laugh told me I wasn't being argued with. I was being sorted. That laugh stayed with me after it faded, hanging in the air like a smell you can't quite place. No one apologized. No one even glanced my way. The conversation thinned out, plates scraping softly as forks slowed. It felt like the room had already moved on from me, as if the moment had been logged, sorted, and filed away as settled. Then something shifted, not in tone, but in action. My wife stood and reached for the soup pot. She didn't ask if I still wanted more. She didn't look at me. She tilted the pot and peered inside, as if checking whether it was worth the effort. What remained wasn't enough for a full serving. Mostly broth, a few soft vegetables drifting near the bottom. "Well," she said, half to her parents, half to the room, "this is what's left." No one responded. That seemed to be answer enough. She brought the pot closer and tipped it toward my bowl. The sound came first. A hollow, watery slosh, the clink of the ladle against the rim as she scraped. It wasn't careless. It was efficient. She poured until the bowl was full, then set the pot aside with a small nod, like a task completed. The smell of reheated broth rose up, sharp and thin. I looked at the bowl. It wasn't insulting in itself. It was food, warm. But something about the way it was done, without a word, without a question, made my chest tighten. I hadn't been offered anything. I'd been assigned it. Her mother continued eating, eyes on her plate. Her father leaned back slightly in his chair, hands resting on his stomach, satisfied. No one said, "Are you okay?" No one said, "That was unnecessary." The room accepted it as reasonable. That was worse than the laugh. I picked up my spoon and held it there, suspended. The broth trembled slightly with the movement. I could feel my pulse in my wrist. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for. Permission, maybe? or a sign that someone saw what was happening and would stop it. Instead, the next thing came quickly. My wife reached for her plate, scraping together the scraps left from her meal. A piece of carrot, some soft meat fibers, breadcrumbs soaked through. She stood again and took a step toward me. "Here," she said, her voice light, almost casual. "You might as well finish this, too." She tipped the plate without ceremony. It didn't fly. It didn't shatter. It slid. The scraps struck my chest first, warm and wet, then some splashed up against my jaw and cheek. Broth soaked into my shirt. A piece of carrot clung near my collarbone before dropping into my lap. For a moment, no one moved. "You don't do anything all day," she added, her tone flat. "The least you can do is eat what's put in front of you." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Something inside me split open then, not into shouting or tears, but into a sharp awareness. Time stretched. I could feel the heat in my face, the weight of the food against my skin. My mind raced through choices faster than I could follow them. Say something now. Roll away. Push the table. Do nothing. I felt the urge to stand up, even though I couldn't. Felt it like muscle memory, like my body forgetting its limits for half a second. My hands clenched against the armrests. My jaw tightened until it ached. But I didn't move. I reached for my napkin slowly, deliberately, dabbed at my face, wiped my shirt. I took my time, not to provoke, not to perform, just to reclaim a little control. My wife turned away before I finished, already talking to her mother about something else. I didn't defend myself. I didn't accuse. I didn't explain. The silence wasn't submission anymore. It was containment. I adjusted the bowl in front of me, turning it so the pattern on the rim lined up evenly with the edge of the placemat. My hand didn't shake. That small, exact motion steadied me in a way nothing else could. I understood then that what had just happened wasn't about dinner. It wasn't about hunger or leftovers or manners. It was about permission, about how far they could go without consequence. And they had gone further than they knew. I realized then that staying quiet any longer would cost me more than speaking ever could. I sat there, broth soaking into my collar, carrot slice still clinging stubbornly to my shirt like it belonged. I didn't wipe it right away. I waited, not to make a point, but because something in me had finally stopped scrambling to keep up. I straightened my place setting with slow, careful hands. Napkin folded again. Spoon set parallel to the edge of the bowl. No rush, no fuss. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask for an explanation. I didn't even glance at anyone across the table. The room expected a reaction, a protest, a snapped word, even a sigh. But none came. And in that absence, something colder crept in. Not fear, uncertainty. Because I hadn't done what they were prepared for. "Do you want me to get you another shirt?" my wife asked, without looking up. I shook my head once. That was all. She returned to her meal. Her mother reached for the pepper. Her father cleared his throat and mumbled something about keeping the peace. Everyone pretended nothing had happened. I suppose it was easier that way. But I'd drawn a line, and I knew they'd all felt it, not in words, but in what I didn't say. Part of me wanted to wheel back from the table and leave the room, the house, the whole theater of it. just disappear down the hall and shut the door. But I didn't, because that's what someone broken would do. That's what a burden would do. And I was not going to let them write me out that easily. I stayed seated, upright, shoulders back, not defiant, just present. I reached for my glass, took a sip of lukewarm water, set it back down without a sound. The table felt too quiet, too even. My silence had taken up more space than a scream would have. I saw it in the way my wife fidgeted with her fork, in the way her father cleared his throat again, though he had nothing to say. The weight wasn't mine anymore. I had shifted it. I didn't look at the clock, but I could feel time crawl by. I took in the shape of things, the fading steam from the dishes, the scrape of a chair leg across tile, the hum of the refrigerator kicking on in the background. I was still here. That mattered more than I realized. Somewhere around the fifth slow breath, something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger. I'd been angry before, at work, in traffic, during bad football calls. This wasn't that. It was something cleaner. I wasn't trying to make them see me anymore. Not trying to win their understanding or approval. That road had closed. I wasn't bargaining for space. I was claiming it. Not loudly, not with fists, but with presence. It felt like putting up a wall inside, not against them, but around myself. A border that said, "You don't get to define me anymore." Not by tone, not by scraps, not by the way they'd laughed while I sat dripping in soup. I didn't need to convince anyone I was still a man. I only needed to remember it myself. A fork clinked against porcelain. My wife rose to clear plates. Her mother offered to help, and they moved together toward the kitchen, trading light conversation like the room wasn't dense with something unspoken. I looked up at the clock then, digital, red numbers glowing above the stove. 7 minutes had passed. It felt like longer. Like something fundamental had been reassembled in that stretch of time. I hadn't counted seconds. I'd counted breath. Slow, steady, anchoring me. I didn't expect a knock, didn't expect salvation or interference. But I knew, deep down, the universe rarely let a shift like this sit untouched. I turned my eyes to the front hallway. Then it rang. The doorbell. The sound sliced clean through the pretense of normal. My wife stopped mid-sentence. Her mother froze with a glass halfway to the sink. Even her father, half dozing in his chair, jolted upright. Only I didn't flinch. I watched them look at each other, then at the door, as if the air had betrayed them. I didn't ask who it was. I didn't speculate. I knew only one thing. This wasn't part of their plan. And for the first time in hours, maybe days, maybe longer, I felt steady. Before anyone moved, I reached out and adjusted the edge of the placemat beneath my bowl. Just a flick of my fingers, aligning the pattern with the wood grain of the table. Precise, calm, mine. It was the same gesture I'd made 1,000 times over the years. But tonight, it wasn't just habit. It was readiness. I sat back slightly, hands folded. I could feel the moment teeter, like something leaning toward inevitability. They didn't know what had changed, but I did. When the door opened, it wasn't help that walked in. It was the truth. The man stood in the doorway like he had been expected, though no one in the room knew him. Late 50s, tailored gray jacket, tie still knotted perfectly despite the hour. His presence wasn't loud, it was composed, neutral even. "Ira Marin?" he asked, his voice steady, as if he were confirming a package drop-off. I nodded, still seated at the dining table, with soup slowly cooling beside me and tension far from it. "My name's Daniel Kessler. I represent the estate of Louise Marin." He paused. "May I come in?" My wife's mother made a soft noise, something between a gasp and a correction, but said nothing. My wife remained near the sink, towel clenched. I gestured toward the living room. "Come in." Daniel stepped forward and closed the door gently behind him. No rush, no hesitation. He carried a single manila envelope, thick but not bulky, and held it with both hands as if it held something delicate. He didn't hand it to my wife, not to her father, not to the man standing behind her with a half-eaten biscuit still in hand. He walked directly to me and extended the envelope. "This was meant for you, specifically." The emphasis was quiet but unmistakable. I took it without looking at it right away. I looked at them, each of them, before I opened it. My wife's expression held no curiosity, only dread disguised as politeness. Her father squinted. Her mother blinked too often, a tell I hadn't noticed before. Something shifted then. Not visibly, not like a crash, but more like water finally finding its own level. They no longer looked at me like I was in the way. They looked at me like they'd underestimated the storm. Daniel waited until I glanced inside, then cleared his throat and began. "The amount is fixed, $990,000. He said it like he was giving me the weather report. No inflection, no congratulations. "She left it to you directly, unencumbered, until this morning. The codicil was added within the legal time frame and signed by 2 independent witnesses." His briefcase, which he hadn't opened, remained on the side table. "We verified all terms. The funds are real. Transfer can begin within 72 hours of confirmation." No excitement, no awe, just the kind of certainty you can't fake. My wife didn't speak, but I heard her shift her weight. Even the floorboard noticed. Then came the catch. Daniel looked at me, not unkind, but measured. "There is a condition, one that must be acknowledged formally." He waited. I nodded once. "You must remain in sole control of all decisions tied to the inheritance. No power of attorney, no shared authority, no spousal signatures. You are to be the one making choices." He paused, letting it settle. "If that condition is violated, if influence is evident or proven, the inheritance is forfeited." There was no need to look around. I could feel the temperature in the room drop without checking the thermostat. It wasn't about money. It was about agency. And Louise, my late sister-in-law, had known exactly what she was protecting me from. No one objected, not out loud, but the shift was visible. My wife gripped the counter tighter than necessary. Her father looked at the ceiling as if the answer might be hiding in the beams. Her mother's lips pursed so tightly they nearly vanished. No words were spoken. None needed to be. Silence became the new argument, and in that silence, roles rearranged themselves. Not dramatically, but irrevocably. I didn't feel saved. I felt steady. Because now, finally, there were rules. No more passive disapproval, no more orchestrated help. Now, if they wanted to push, they had to risk something. I didn't gloat. That wasn't the point. I felt something colder than triumph. Clarity. They hadn't lost control. I'd reclaimed it. I placed the envelope down next to my untouched glass and slid it into perfect alignment with the edge of the placemat. A gesture I'd done countless times. But this time, it wasn't about comfort or reflex. It was declaration. They didn't need to understand it, but they felt it. I watched them recalibrate, how quickly they began to soften their postures, smile in brittle ways, look toward me instead of past me. But I knew the difference now. I knew what this meant. They would speak kindly. They would act gently. And I would have to watch closely, because this time, it wouldn't be soup that hit me in the face. It would be politeness sharpened to a blade. That's when kindness showed up, too suddenly to be real. The next morning, everything smelled like politeness. Coffee was already brewed when I wheeled into the kitchen. The pot was still warm. A mug sat beside it, the good one, not the chipped one I usually got. Creamer was out, napkin folded. I hadn't asked for any of it. My wife smiled without showing teeth. "Thought you might like some before you get started with your day." Her voice didn't reach me. It floated past me like a cue delivered on stage. I nodded and poured slowly, watching the liquid settle like I was reading it for answers. From the corner of my eye, I saw her mother rearranging fruit in a bowl that didn't need arranging. Her father rustled a newspaper but hadn't turned a page. There was choreography now. Every step, every pause felt rehearsed. They were gentle with their words that morning, softer voices, smoother transitions. My wife leaned over and touched my arm lightly. "We were talking last night, just thinking through ways to make this easier. For you." Easier had more syllables than usual. She kept speaking about how maybe it'd be better if she helped manage a few of the logistics. Things like insurance, calls with Daniel Kessler, even organizing my calendar. She used the word "we" a lot. Sometimes your best interest. Occasionally, streamline. No one had spoken to me this directly in days, but not once did they ask what I wanted. They talked around me, over me, but made sure to keep their tones smooth, like radio hosts reading traffic reports. I smiled, just enough to keep their smiles from slipping. Around 10, a folder appeared on the table. No fanfare, just laid there beside my toast. Inside, a packet of forms, stapled and highlighted in yellow. Printed from the internet, judging by the formatting. No attorney names, just blank lines for secondary signer, emergency decision maker, and one labeled financial stability contact. My wife's voice came from the hallway. "We didn't want to overwhelm you, Ira, but just in case something ever happened, it'd be good to have a few safeguards. For your protection." "Just in case," she said again, like a lullaby. The phrase settled on the kitchen tiles like a mousetrap set but not yet sprung. I didn't speak, didn't sigh, didn't touch the papers. Her mother stepped into view again and added, "It's not that we think you can't handle things. It's just, well, you've had a lot to manage lately." A beat. "And now, with the inheritance, it just makes sense to stay ahead of things." I could have laughed, but that would have given them something to react to. Instead, I took another sip of coffee. No sugar, just how I like it, and kept my face neutral. Their kindness was immaculate, flawless, and it held the same cold efficiency as the soup ladled out the night before. I had decisions to make, but not at that table. That table wasn't mine anymore, not the way it used to be. Too many fingerprints on it now. So I let the conversation drift without anchoring to any of it. Let them mistake my quiet for confusion. Let them believe they were ahead. They'd made one miscalculation. Kindness, when used as a weapon, always leaves fingerprints. And I had begun to see them all. At noon, I said I had to step out. Something about stopping by the pharmacy and swinging past the bank. My wife nodded like she was trying not to look relieved. "Do you need help? I can come with." "No," I said. "I've got it." It was the calmest I'd spoken all day. She tried not to follow me with her eyes, but I felt them trail me anyway, watching my coat, my wallet. Whether I took the envelope or not, I didn't. They wanted to see where I was going and who I was becoming. The driveway was quiet. Sunlight bounced off the hood of the car like it didn't know what had happened inside that house last night. I opened the door, slid inside, and took a breath. Then, before starting the engine, I reached toward the center console and adjusted the mirror by exactly 2 degrees. A simple move, one I always did. But today, I did it slowly, with care. That small, familiar motion wasn't habit anymore. It was me reminding myself, I am still in control of this vehicle, my life. The road ahead didn't feel long. It felt clear. I wasn't angry. I wasn't scared. I was done being surprised. Their kindness was a tactic. Their smiles were strategy. Their "just in case" was code for "just until we get control back." And I wasn't giving it to them. Not quietly, not politely, because now I knew. They thought they were protecting me, but I could see the trap closing, so I waited. Not because I was afraid, but because I understood timing was more powerful than noise. Patience wasn't my weakness anymore. It was my choice, and I'd already decided when to speak. 2 days later, I rolled through the glass doors of the law office and into a room designed not to remember anyone. Gray carpet, taupe walls, a polished table too long for comfort. No diplomas on the walls, no photos of family. Just a clock ticking in the corner like it had no stake in what was about to unfold. I settled into my chair. The wheels made no sound on the floor. Across from me, my wife sat rigid, hands folded just a bit too neatly. Her parents were there too. They avoided eye contact, but they didn't look away either. A young associate from Kessler's office clicked open a laptop. Beside him, the senior attorney, a woman in her 60s, all steel and no smile, nodded once. "Shall we begin?" It started with concerns. "Ira's been withdrawn," my wife said, her tone buttered with care. "He's been forgetting things. There was that time he left the stove on." "One time," I said quietly. She blinked, startled I'd interrupted. She recovered quickly. "We just want what's best. For him, and for the legacy he now carries." Her father leaned forward. "It's not about control. It's about safety." Then came the folder, highlighted notes, half-context emails, a calendar printout with missed appointments circled in red. The suggestion was subtle. "He's slipping, don't you see?" And for a moment, I could feel it work. The room shifted slightly. The attorney leaned back, brows furrowed. Doubt had been invited in, and it accepted its seat. I didn't flinch. Instead of defending every accusation, I reached for the pen resting at the edge of the table and turned it once between my fingers. That familiar movement, the echo, settled me. It wasn't nervousness. It was readiness. I placed the pen back, aligned perfectly with the folder in front of me. Then I nodded once to the associate. He understood. From the side of his briefcase, he slid out a thin black binder. No labels, just content. He opened it, slow and steady, and began. On March 2nd, Mr. Ira Rosen called our office at 9:13 a.m. to schedule a preliminary consultation regarding estate designation. He followed that up with a written confirmation at 10:42 a.m. and a signed engagement letter the next day. Click, slide, a printed email. On March 8th, Mrs. Rosen, without Mr. Rosen's knowledge, contacted our office and asked about revoking his authority to manage assets. Another document. Highlighted. The air in the room thickened. Next, phone logs, voice transcripts, bank activity showing split transfers made without his awareness. Not illegal, but dishonest. Still, no one raised their voice. No accusations, no moralizing, just facts, in order. With each page turned, the posture across the table shrank. Her mother fidgeted with her bracelet. Her father suddenly had nothing to say. My wife sat still, but too still. Her breathing changed. Her chin tightened. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence said more than any outburst could. The lawyer across from me folded her hands. "Ira," she said carefully, "would you like to respond?" I looked at each of them, one by one. No anger, no pity, just clarity. And then I said the only sentence that mattered. I'm not the one who needs protecting. That was it. No speech, no declaration, just truth, plain and irreversible. The attorney nodded. Her expression didn't shift, but the room had already changed shape. Control, once assumed, had quietly moved. They knew it. I knew it. And for the first time in weeks, I felt my lungs fully expand. No joy, no revenge, just release. This wasn't about winning. It was about anchoring. I didn't win back my life. I took responsibility for it. A full week passed before I walked back through the front door. It was early evening. The house looked exactly as it had the day I left for the lawyer's office. Framed family photos still hung in their neat rows. The same basket of unopened mail sat near the stairs, and the smell of lemon wood polish still lingered faintly near the baseboards. But none of it felt the same. The silence had changed. Before, it was the kind that pressed in, sharp, watchful, waiting to catch you slipping. Now, it hung softer, dull, like something grieving its own purpose. I stood in the entryway for a moment, taking in the absence. Her purse was gone from its usual place by the coat rack. No shoes by the back door. A photo was missing from the hallway wall. I didn't need a note to know what had been decided. No doors slammed. No last-minute tears. Just subtraction. Dinner was quiet. I reheated some soup from the freezer, sat alone at the kitchen table, and ate without needing to defend my appetite. I even went back for a second bowl, just because I could. The chair across from me stayed empty, and I didn't rush to fill it. Later that night, I found a folded paper on the coffee table, some sort of polite memo about forwarding addresses and what might still belong to her. No accusations, no apologies, just the language of polite unraveling. I left it where it was. If there were regrets on her part, they were careful not to get emotional. And I respected that in a strange way. Clean endings are rarely clean, but this was as close as we were ever going to get. The next morning, I made a call I'd put off for too long. It was to a realtor. Not because I wanted revenge or some big new start, but because the space no longer fit. Not just the house, the life it had been arranged around. "I'd like to begin the process," I told him plainly. "No rush, but I'm serious. I wasn't looking to flee. I was just done negotiating with ghosts. I didn't ask permission. I didn't call to explain. I told. That mattered." 3 days after that, I found myself in the garage, sorting old tools and boxes that had gone untouched for years. At some point, without thinking, I reached for a small wrench on the shelf. I turned it once in my hand, rotated it slowly, then set it back in line with the others. That gesture, small, precise, always the same, had followed me through every chapter of this mess, from silence to tension to truth. And here it was again. But now, it didn't feel like a tick, or armor, or even a message. It felt like ownership. The final form of the echo wasn't about habit, it was about presence. I had chosen to stay, to remain in my skin, on my terms. That alone felt like a revolution. That evening, I sat by the window with a cup of coffee I'd made the way I liked it. Too strong, no sugar. The yard outside hadn't been mowed in a week, and I didn't feel the urgency to correct that. Let it grow. Let it breathe. I stared at the sky until the sun dipped behind the roof lines, and I thought about dignity. Not the kind people talk about at funerals, but the kind you fight for quietly when no one's clapping. It costs something, that kind of dignity. Not money, not even relationships. It costs the comfort of being understood. It costs the illusion that silence keeps the peace. It costs the safety of staying small so others don't have to feel challenged. But in the end, it's worth it. Because what you keep isn't the approval of people who need you quiet. It's your own damn voice. If you're listening now, I want to say this, not as a lesson, but maybe as a kind of recognition. There's a moment in some lives, usually later, when most of the noise has settled, when you realize that being tolerated is not the same as being respected. You don't need to burn bridges to walk your own road. You just have to stop waiting for someone else to pave it for you. Most of the time, the real revolution doesn't look like shouting. It looks like sitting still, with your name in your mouth, and not letting anyone mispronounce it again. I didn't get everything back, but I kept what mattered.